Well, over these last weeks, of course, there's been that question asked again and again, how do we know when we're in this integrated state called Satchitananda, where the three levels of life have merged? And it seems possible that we have established that there are certain indicators of this state, several of them being where we have an absence of dialogue in our mind, going back and forth, what ifs and so forth. And then we find that life is no longer a mirror for us, and also that there's responses but there's no reactions, and also that we find ourselves naturally and effortlessly being present, here, present, always, 100% present. But what would it be that would be the realizations and awarenesses that arise out of this state? And there are several little stories that might give us a clue as to what may be present in our own life. And as it so happens, there's that story about that very great singer, and he was called Tamsen. He had a voice like a nightingale, and he could play the lute like an angel. And he was the court musician of a very great king. One day the king said to him, "You know, you are the greatest singer and musician in the land." And Tamsen said, "Oh no, there is someone greater than I." The king said, "Oh, who might that be?" And Tamsen said, "Well, that is my master, Mansour Swami." And the king said, "Well, I want to hear him sing." And Tamsen said, "Oh, my master does not bow down to kings, nor does he sing for kings." Well, this made the king even more avid to hear him. And Tamsen said, "Well, maybe if you come in disguise, he might sing for us." So the king dressed himself in the garb of a peasant, and in the company of Tamsen, he went off to seek out Mansour Swami. But when they arrived at the house of Mansour Swami said, "I'm not singing today." And Tamsen and the king being a little bit abashed, but then Tamsen had a thought. And even though the door had been shut in their face, Tamsen stood outside the door of Mansour Swami with the king in disguise, and he sang his master's favorite song, but he purposely sang it off-key. So his master opened the door and said, "Haven't you learned anything in a lifetime of singing?" And immediately began to sing the song as it was supposed to be sung. Well, tears came to the king's eyes. They flowed down his cheeks. He'd never in his life heard anything so sweet and lilting as this song on the lips of Mansour Swami. So when the king returned with Tamsen back to his palace, he said to Tamsen, "Why is it that you don't sing like your master?" And Tamsen said, "Well, Your Majesty, I am your puppet. I sing when you direct me to sing, but my master only sings when he's inspired to sing." And then there's another little story about this character, Birbal. and he was the advisor to the great King Akbar. Now, one day there was a widow and her mother, whose husband had been in service of King Akbar for many years and served well in his army. But he died and left his wife and his mother bereft. So the two women decided that they would go to the king's advisor Birbal to ask what it was that they could do. So Birbal's advice was, why don't you go to King Akbar? He is known for his largesse. He will no doubt help you. But the widow said, I don't want to be a beggar. Oh, said Birbal, well, take a gift to the king. So the widow thought what she could take as a gift, and she finally had a thought. So they were bought, in fact they were taken into the presence of the great King Akbar by Birbal himself. And the widow presented her rather heavy gift to King Akbar, and when he opened the gift, he found that it was a rather rusty, heavy, not too well made sword. And the widow said, this is the sword that my husband took to war. He used it well to kill your enemies, so I give it to you as a gift. Well, King Akbar took the sword, but he could see that it was not really of any value. It was rusty and it wasn't well made. So he handed it to one of his courtiers and asked them to bring 5 pieces of gold to be given to each of the women. But Birbal intervened. He took the sword from the courtier and he began to examine it very closely. And King Akbar said, what are you doing? Oh, nothing, I'm just examining the sword. And King Akbar said, now come on, out with it. What's this thought that you have? And Birbal said, well, you know, great king, when one becomes a king, he becomes like the philosopher's stone. He can turn everything into gold. And King Akbar immediately realized what Birbal was saying. So he instructed his courtier to weigh the sword and to give the 2 women its weight in gold. This was done, and the 2 women went off very happily. What do these 2 stories indicate to us that we might begin to experience in our own life when we accept and acknowledge that we do indeed live in a state of integration, Satchitananda, where the 3 levels of life have merged to bring about these things that are clearly present, a state of presence and absence of dialogue, etc., etc. What are these realizations that arise from this story? What does this first story indicate? And the second story indicate? A singer who is no longer bound, sings only when inspiration arises. And a recognition that in this place everything turns to gold. Divine Mother had a saying she would quote often: die while you're alive and be absolutely dead. Then all that you do will be good.
Well, if you're dead, you're not doing it for yourself, are you?
That's right.
It's entirely for whoever is in front of you or whoever you come in contact with.
That's right. So what do these stories indicate for us? What is the realization that comes out of this state?
Well, you don't have to sing for anybody.
That's right.
You only have to sing when that when that person or whatever is in front of you, whoever you're singing to.
Yes, and what does that make a summation of? We're no longer a slave to life. In any way at all, we're no longer a slave to life, in any form it takes. We're not a puppet. We don't dance when someone pulls a string. Isn't it so? But what does it mean in this second story, that in this position of kingship, or right, you can call that translated into a state of Satchitananda, that everything you touch turns to gold? What is it that we realize about this place now? Where are the pairs of opposites in your life that you judge good or bad? Whether it be a pain in your belly or a rash or whatever it is. Do you immediately take it back? Oh, it must be some karma from some past. I must have some unfinished business and blah, 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 blah. Is it there in our life now?
Everything that's there in front of us, whatever we're doing is perfect.
It's perfect. Yes. So we can relate to this. But what about this saying, die while you're alive and be absolutely dead? What's happened to us to attain that state of Satchitananda? What is it that has to have been relinquished, just like you spoke about now? And I want this, I want that, I think this, the dialogue is absent.
So there's no more things that we put outside as projecting? So
No projections.
It becomes like that?
That's right.
Like that?
Yes. So couldn't it be that that can be translated or interpreted in the second story as King Midas' touch turning everything into gold? What happens when somebody comes and unloads you with all of their problems now?
Because when they go, they feel like they're rich, like they're in.
Yes.
They feel so much lighter.
Lighter and freedom. But what about us?
Well, we don't feel anything.
We don't know.
We
We know.
feel burdened by it
At all. Not at all. So we can translate these stories into our own life as recognition of those things that are there for us in this state that we must acknowledge. The indicators are there. Once it's been acknowledged, then the awareness of those even siddhis, as they're called, are present in our life. Everything we touch does become gold, so to speak. We can see that in the reactions of those we meet, the touch, the healing. So are there more? There are so many stories about these so-called siddhis, or gifts, or graces that come unbidden in this state called Satchitananda. But only when we've acknowledged in ourselves that indeed this is our natural state. We might slip out of it momentarily, but we find ourselves now having purged the mind to such a degree that we are naturally present. There is an absence of toing and froing. If I say this might happen if I do them. The dialogue, not there. We're not looking out at life as a mirror saying, oh, well, if they've got, and they're directing anger at me, then I must have anger in us and all that stuff. Not there. And we don't react. How could you do that to me? Oh, I've been a good person. And the rest that goes with that reactionary stuff. We have to accept this state that's there for us, earned over this so-called spiritual journey. Thank you, thank you.